Do you dream of writing a novel? When you feel the urgency to write a novel, you aren't making it up. When that urgency won't let go, there's a reason. Turn your readers into raving fans. Reveal the power of your voice and your story. Writing is an act of courage, and you have what it takes. How to Write a Novel That Sells by Lana McAra will take you across the finish line. Visit howtowriteanovelthatsells.net and take that powerful next step now.
Welcome to the Fiction Writers Podcast with Lana McAra, where you will discover tips, tricks, and ideas for fiction that is #unputdownable. Here you'll find new energy, new perspectives, new resources, and new ideas that will spark your creativity into a blaze of brilliance. It's easier than you think. Be sure you visit our website at www.fictionwriterspodcast.com. While you're there, subscribe to us via your favorite network. Now, get out your notebook, tune in, and let's get started.
Do you ever struggle with creativity? Well, that's what we're going to talk about today. My name is Lana McAra, and welcome to the Fiction Writers Podcast. Tips, tricks, and ideas for fiction that is #unputdownable. Today, I am honored to welcome to our broadcast Elizabeth Johnston. Elizabeth is a creativity and self-actualization coach. She has taught adults in all areas of writing, novella, poetry, screenwriting, memoir, and on for more than 25 years. She has a BA in creative writing, MFA in film and video, and she's a certified guided autobiography instructor. Her creative nonfiction book, No Small Potatoes, was made possible by the Canada Council of the Arts, and her video poem, Keepsake, was shortlisted in 2 film festival competitions. Elizabeth's next project is a nonfiction book, Own Your Creativity, which is due out in the fall of 2025. Welcome, Elizabeth.
Thank you so much for having me on your show.
Yes, I'm so delighted. And I just realized that this episode is going to be coming out right around your launch.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I'm so happy with that.
Yeah, so send me the date, the launch date, and I will see if we can help you out with that.
Lovely. Thank you.
Tell me what got you started with writing.
How did I get started with writing? Wow, what a great question. It's kind of by accident because I was in university. I was in my second year, and I had decided that I'm going to major in humanities, which I just loved my first year classes of. And, my first year I got all A's, and then I thought for sure in my second year in humanities, I'll get all A's because, I got this thing down pat. And anyway, so my first essay for this one particular professor, he wrote a note on it to come see him because I didn't get an A. I got quite a bit lower than that, and I was pretty shocked and embarrassed. And I thought, oh my goodness, isn't that enough that, I'm already embarrassed. I have to go and see the teacher in his office. And anyway, I went, and he said, well, this is a lousy essay, but it's a really good story. Have you ever thought of going into creative writing? And so he helped me. And at that point, I hadn't even thought of myself as a writer. Although, I did write, I had a journal, and, I was fascinated with stories, and growing up as a kid, I'd watch Walt Disney films, and then I would bend anybody's ear that would let me about this, and I'd recount the whole story, and I would talk about the foreshadowing, and, and we didn't know this at this time, but then this happened. And, so when this professor, asked me if I'd ever thought of getting into creative writing, it was a complete surprise. I hadn't grown up thinking, oh, when I grow up, I'm going to be a writer. I thought maybe I'd be a ballerina or something. But, so he helped me with the application. And so I got into that program, and the rest is history, basically, because like I said, I might have come to writing later on sometime, but the fact that it happened at that time really was the pivot, in my life. And I started thinking myself as a writer. And the other thing too is that I realized that there's these things called writers, because before then I would just read books and devour them. And I didn't really think about who wrote them. Yeah, there's the name on the cover, but like, that's kind of beside this point, it's the story, right? So then I thought, oh my goodness, there was a real living human being who sat down and wrote all these words and figured it all out.
What a great point. Oh my gosh. And I was the same way. I did not think about the writer at all, which tells you that we were reading some pretty good books if
Yeah.
the writer disappears. Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Yeah. Yeah, I hadn't thought about that. Yeah.
What a great teacher.
Oh my goodness. He was amazing. His name was Don Coles, and he got the Governor General's Award for Poetry up here in Canada. And anyway, I was so lucky to have him as a professor, but many of the other professors in the creative writing program at that time I went to were just phenomenal and amazing.
Yes, I was an English minor, and I did not like my papers at all. I never had a teacher take me, in their office and give me advice. I just knew that academic writing was not for me. And it isn't. It isn't really. To this day, I do write nonfiction, but not academic.
Different. Yeah.
Not academic stuff. So is it true that some people are just not creative?
Some people like to think that because it gets them off the hook. But no, everybody is creative. It's just that some of us have a harder time reconnecting to it in adulthood because, if you can think as far back as when you were 3 or 4 or 5 years old, you were endlessly creative and you did all sorts of things to occupy your time. You made up stories, told tall tales, and it just came easy to us. But George Land from NASA, did you ever hear of that study that George Land did? So NASA wanted to hire, the most creative thinkers possible for their program, but first they had to figure out, like, how can we measure creativity in people? And so they hired George Land to do this survey, and he expanded it to include people at all ages. And so he started off with, pre-kindergartner kids, kids that hadn't entered the school system first, and on his scale, they were almost like 100% creative. Then he checked in with kids at after they've been in school for, I think, the first year, and then year 5, and then year 10, and then in university. And you might not be surprised to realize that their creativity genius went down. These same kids, that were tested initially, by the time that they became adults in university, they had almost no creativity at all. And so the thing that they pointed to was school. School isn't about, fostering creativity. It's about making sure that you pass the exam so that you can go on to the next year. And it's also about making sure that people can get a good job. Right? Because, like, how many of us as kids were, when the adults say, "Oh, what are you going to be when you grow up?" And maybe we see, ballerina or something, and they say, "Well, what about being a lawyer or a doctor? Wouldn't you want to do that? Like, that would be fun, wouldn't it?" And so our parents are training us, the society and the education system are all training us to be good workers. And to be good workers, you can't have creativity, because that gets in the way of, like, no, do it this way. This widget goes here. This next one goes here, right? And it's almost like it's a factory. And so everybody is creative. Like I said, it's just that it's been bred out of us in the system. And there's no surprise that when people retire, they often say, okay, now I have time to, like, do fun stuff, right? And they recognize that fun stuff has been missing. but there's other people who, when they're working or, in their 20s or 30s or 40s, recognize like, wait a minute, this isn't fun anymore. And they go searching for something to fulfill themselves, or they want to write a book, and they'll maybe search you out to, help them with that. So I think like, even if we say we're not creative, we know in the back of our mind that that is a missing piece. And instead of saying like, I'm going to go for it, I'm going to rekindle that because we think it's going to be such a big job, we just say, oh no, I'm not creative, and pretend like it doesn't matter.
Yes, I used to say that all the time. I'm not creative. I'm not creative. Because when I got an assignment in English class, I would struggle so much with the assignment. But on the other hand, I'm crocheting, I'm cake decorating, I'm doing all of these other artistic things, sewing. I used to sew all the time, and my life was constantly creative. It just wasn't sitting in English class writing an essay or a story or something that they had, put in a little box for me
Right.
to do.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And another story from my high school. I loved art class, and at one point the teacher said, okay, so for this next project, your big, semester project, choose anything that you want to paint, and make a big picture or something like this. So anyway, I had just recently had some wallpaper put into my bedroom, and I just love these like big, huge roses, and they were just so detailed and everything. And anyway, and I thought, that's what I'm going to draw. I'm going to paint and draw these flowers from my wallpaper. And I got a low mark, and the criticism from my art teacher was that it looks like wallpaper.
Imagine that.
So I mean, there's a lot of people that carrying around those stories that limit our creativity. In one of my writing challenges online, I had a woman who, she was in her 70s, and she was a nun, and she had never written a word since she came until she came into my challenge. And it was because when she was in grade school, she was criticized for a story that she wrote, and it devastated her so much that she never wrote again. But she would tell stories to her fellow sisters, and they all said like, oh, you should write these stories down, but she never did until she came into my challenge and gave herself permission to do that. And it's amazing that how many people have those kind of really heartbreaking stories. Like, what could they have done if they hadn't carried around those wounds for such a long time?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I always thought I couldn't do art. I couldn't draw or paint. And then my daughter was very ill. She had a chronic illness, and she wanted to go to a drawing class. And I thought, well, that'll get her out of her room. She was in quite a bit of pain. And so I joined the class, and we sit there together and do the art. And I found out that with the right teacher, I actually could do that. I became very just thrilled to find out I had another thing I could do. I had no idea. And if I hadn't gone with my daughter to support her, I would have never found out.
Wow, that's amazing.
So I think a lot of times we tell ourselves these stories and we don't put our toe in the water.
Yeah, exactly. And it's also because we're overwhelmed with day-to-day responsibilities sometimes. When we say I'm not creative, what we're probably really saying is that I don't have time. I'm overwhelmed, or I'm burnt out, or, any number of things that happens to us when we're adults and we have families and responsibilities. And maybe we're looking after, a parent, or, somebody like that. And so it takes up a lot of our energy. But, as the stewardesses say, put your oxygen mask on first, right? You can't help anybody, unless you do that. And And that's what I found, is that once I started making more room in my life for my creativity, it filled things up in me that gave me more energy to help other people. Instead of feeling like obligated, like, oh, I have to do this, or, or feeling guilty. It's like, oh yeah, I know that person could, use my help on that, but I just don't have the bandwidth, or, and I feel guilty. It's like, if you fill your cup up first, then everything else falls into place.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I can remember I was homeschooling 7 children. And, as far as creativity goes, um, but I would do projects like I did a quilt where I took paint markers, and drew on the blocks. So they were large blocks. It was only like 9 or 12 blocks in the whole baby quilt, but I was drawing.
Yeah, nice.
One way or another, it has to come out. And when I got a divorce, I could not write.
Yeah.
At this point, I'd written like 26 books, couldn't write at all. And so what did I do? I went and got canvases and paint. I started painting instead. So it's inside of us.
Yeah.
Have to let it out.
Definitely. Yeah. Ellie, I came across this quote recently from Brené Brown, and she said that unused creativity is not benign. It metastasizes into grief or loss or anger, and so like if you don't do stuff with that, it gets backed up in your system.
It's really true. It's really true. I've had so many students in my classes that say, I thought I was too busy and I was so miserable and depressed and all these different very negative emotions. And then when they finally said, I'm just going to do it, I'm
Yeah.
just going to do it, they became happy and energized and liked their life a whole lot more.
Yeah. And like, at one point before I was starting to do my master's, I needed to get like a little temp job to tide me over before I started my semester. And, and I don't like, office work or clerical work or data entry. For me, it's very boring. I can do it for like a couple of weeks, but then it's like, okay, that's it. That's my tolerance level. But I got this temp job for 6 weeks, and I was really worried about how I was going to manage to keep writing, because I was working on a poetry project at that time, and then I thought, well, because I would get up really early, have to take a bus across town into the industrial area, and then by the time I got home, I was exhausted, and I would have my dinner, watch a bit of TV, fall into sleep, and then get up and do it over the next day. So it was like this existential kind of nightmare. And I thought to myself, well, I know myself well enough that even though I say I'm as soon as I get home, before I eat my dinner, I'm going to do some writing, I knew I wouldn't. So I thought, I'm going to get up an hour early in the morning, and I'm going to do my writing then. And that meant actually getting up at 4:30 in the morning. And so I wrote, and something so surprising happened was that I sailed through those 6 weeks, and it wasn't an annoyance like it usually is. And even after like that first like 2 weeks, when I thought like, okay, now it's going to get bad for me, it didn't. It's like I did my job, and I was happy because I put myself first. I got done what was important to me first, and that changes your whole mental and physical landscape.
Absolutely. It's so interesting, the correlations that I see here. So when I was homeschooling those 7 kids, I would get up at 5 in the morning, write for 2 hours. The kids would get up at 7, then we'd start our day. But my writing was done, and I felt so good. I was in the story and the energy of it, and thinking about it through the day, and what I'm going to write tomorrow was filling me up with this beautiful energy, although my day was extremely hectic.
And I love what you just said there, because doing it every day is key, because like, your story is living inside of you, and you're kind of even continuing the creative process during the day. And then the next morning you'll get up and you just pick up where you left off. But if you only did that once a week, you would spend a big chunk of your time figuring out, now, what did I write last week, and where was I, and what were those ideas I had? And that's why it's so important to do it every single day, even if it is just 5 or 10 or 15 minutes.
Beautifully said. I love that. Because yes, would get really annoyed when I had to go back and figure out where I was. Oh, like that's 10 minutes wasted, you know?
Yeah, exactly.
So let's talk a little bit about the cost of creativity and ROI, return on investment. What is your take on that?
Well, I think it's a two-pronged thing. Um, I think that we need to have creativity just for the sake of it, right? We need to have some creativity that doesn't have to perform beyond what it is, right? So what I mean is that sometimes people are saying, okay, I recognize that creativity is important and that I should connect with it and I'll do something, but I'll only do it as long as it brings me money and fast, right? So a lot of people will say, okay, well, I'll do it. Like I'll write a book for my business, and which it can and may not be a creative activity, but some people think of it that way, and then like, oh yeah, I'm an author and I'm being creative. But if it's just for monetary purposes, then it can actually, I think, backfire on you, because creativity is a flow state, and it needs to not be hemmed in by what teachers think is creativity, or what you think is creativity, or what the marketplace thinks is creativity. It has to have some freedom just to be. And so I think that for anybody who wants to make room in their life for their creativity, to recognize that some stuff just has to be for fun, right? Because when you were 5 years old or 4 years old and you made up stories with your dollies, you weren't saying, okay, we're going to make up a story and make sure that we get money for it, right? Like we didn't say that. We were just following the path of our own imagination. And I think that's what we have to make room for, that in our life, and then see where the project takes us. And then if it holds our attention for longer, then it might blossom into something that you could later do, right? And so, for instance, for me, like, there's tons of ideas in my journals that could have blossomed into something, but they didn't hold my attention for long enough, right? But I enjoyed doing those. They still were creative things. And some of those things led me to like, oh, okay, I'm going to follow this path and I'm going to create a project. And that project could see some ROI in the sense of money, but it could also be ROI in the sense of participating in a contest, right? In your local community centers, some photography contest or whatever. And so you go on a mission to create something that has an end place. And I think that's important too for our creativity, because if we are only just like kind of going down different rabbit holes and then never actually creating something, we might actually end up getting bored because we're thinking like, oh, I tried this and I tried that and that didn't stick, right? And then we get negative about ourselves, as opposed to understanding that creativity is both of those things. Creativity is like free form, but it also can go places and have a destination. And I think that we need to incorporate both of those.
Excellent. That is such a great thought, because all those other activities, the crocheting and the painting and the portraiture, pencil portraiture, that wasn't for making money.
Yeah.
I had no idea about that. But then the writing novels held my attention for 14 years before I got published.
Yeah.
And then once I did get published, I wanted to do more. It wasn't a chore. It wasn't a job.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's the other thing too, is that people will, let's say, get involved. Like, let's say you went to that painting class with your daughter and you realize like, wow, this is so fun. I'm going to make this my business. And then, sometimes we're like chasing the business instead of pursuing the creative arts. And I think like sometimes, and I see this in, acquaintances that I know, that as soon as they glom onto some creativity, because they haven't been doing it, but they glom onto it, and then then they will go to like craft fairs and stuff and try to sell their stuff and wonder why nobody's paying $2,000 for a quilt that they made, and like, so you have to understand like that not everything that you do will eventuate in money, but some will, right? And it's like I say to my students, in the class, like we have a 10% in classroom engagement mark, and it encompasses anything that we do in the class. But invariably, there's always a student that says, well, how many marks are we going to get for this? And like, or is this for marks? And I'll say, why are you asking that question? And so, well, because like, I want to know if like I should do this. It's like, yeah, of course you should do it. We're spending in-class time on this. So go ahead and do it. Right. But like what they're really asking is, what's the ROI of my doing this? But not everything that we do is worthy of a grade or a monetary value. Not everything that we do. Right. Some of it is just because. Right. And like in the classroom, it's about that academic creative journey, right? And it's doing activities to learn about yourself and learn about the material and make the connections between yourself and the material.
Yes, yes. You're really opening my understanding. My son he works in data systems for the state. So he's got a very uncreative job.
Yeah.
But in the evenings, he works in community theater.
Oh, wow. Lovely.
He's an actor and he does stage sets, and he's just at the theater. He loves that. And that there's no money in that at all. It's all volunteers. So having the balance of the money-making activity and then the creativity, which, is for no money.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great way to think about your focuses. What are you focusing on? Right. Yeah. So I find that probably 80% of my students are retired professionals.
Mm-hmm.
And they seem to think that they had to wait until they got out of the work, the hustle.
I know. See, that just shows you how strong our like brainwashing in society is. It's like, they say like there's a season for everything, but like when my grandparents had a campground, and so we had seasonal people with their trailers, and so I grew up on there, and I would meet these families and play with their kids, and in the summer only the mom and the kids would come, except for maybe the dad would come for like a week or so, for his summer holiday. Then they would retire, and it would be the mom and dad. They would come, and then the next year it would just be the mom. Now the grandmom, and time and time again, this happened. So many men, they retire, then they don't know what to do with themselves. And because they don't have any meaning, any structure, because they didn't plan for retirement for their creative mind, right? Then they end up dying, they get a heart attack, whatever. And so I just think it's so sad that people don't cultivate their creativity as early as they can, and rekindle it in their adulthood, and then keep that flame burning bright, because that's your bridge into retirement. And without that, you're going to find it difficult, or you're going to try and find a coach like and help them figure out how to go forward in this next stage of their life. And one of the women's that she took my creative writing, life writing workshop. And she said, before I took this workshop, I was afraid of retirement. But now I can see that everything that I did isn't lost. Now that I don't have a job anymore, now that I'm retired, it's not lost. And it's actually made me who I am. And I can continue exploring different aspects of who I am in my retirement.
Absolutely, because we have so much life experience to draw on.
Yeah.
Or especially writing stories. Wow. The number of stories that we have.
Yeah.
over the decades of people that we knew and things that happened to us and
Yeah.
family members. You could just keep on writing for another 30 or 40 years and never run out of material.
Yeah. And during the pandemic, the publishing industry released statistics that memoirs and nonfiction about people went sky high, right? People were craving that during the pandemic because the whole point of nonfiction, creative nonfiction and memoir writing is, people fixing issues in their life, right? They're telling you about problems that they had and how they got, to where they are now. And we as a species crave those kinds of stories about, how to show up in times of challenge or adversity, and we need those stories. We need those stories so that we could figure out how to live our lives and how to make the best choices for ourselves.
Yes, and I am seeing a theme here, and that is that creativity is directly tied to wellness, both mental health and physical health.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And actually they did a study that creativity, people who in retirement were doing weekly creative activities in community, at the end of the year, they had less depression, were on fewer medications, had a better sense of wellness and an outlook on life. Whereas the people who after retirement just, I don't know, hung out in their basement and drank beers and watched football. I don't know what they were doing, but they weren't doing creative activities at all. At the end, they were worse off. They had their physical health was worse, their mental health was worse, and so I think the key here is yes, solo creativity, but also within a community. So once you are rekindling your creativity, find a community that can help you stay the course, because that's one of the reasons that people will maybe unearth their creativity or reconnect to it, but then they don't stick to it because they don't have a community or they don't have a structure that encourages them to keep at it.
Yes, so beautifully said. I spoke at a Florida Writers Association chapter meeting this weekend, and there was, I think, the first time ever, at least 50% of them were older men.
Wow, that's amazing.
It was. Usually I go there and it's women, it's older women, younger women, maybe one or two men, out of 15, 20 people. But there were so many. There were some younger men too, but there were so many older men. And I thought, what a great trend.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's great to see. That's great to see.
And they were so excited and talking and laughing with each other. It was great.
That's wonderful. Yeah. Because I've noticed that too in my offerings, that it's predominantly women, often older women. And we do get, the odd man in there. But more and more they are showing up, and I don't know why that is, but I'm really happy that that's, a trend.
Yes, absolutely. So how do we get more from you?
Yeah, well, you know what? I have a 3-day creativity festival that's coming up in May 12 to 14, and we would love to see you all there. And you're going to be doing a workshop for us as well, and there's going to be panel discussions and other workshops, and it's an experiential event. So you're going to be experiencing these different modalities of creativity. And we're going to have panel discussions, thought-provoking, inspiring panel discussions. And I really wanted to do an online festival for creativity because I think it's time, so many people are craving that. And I think maybe it's a natural extension from the deprivation we had in the pandemic. And then now we've kind of found our footing again and realizing that the life that we had in the pandemic was certainly not ideal. And in terms of, fostering our own creativity, but also being in community. So I really wanted to, because a lot of things I do are indirectly related to creativity, but I just wanted to shout creativity from the rooftops and just invite everybody in to have this amazing experience.
Yes, and then you're releasing a book as well by the same title.
Yes, Own Your Creativity, and that's going to come out in the fall of 2025. And it's going to be all about my philosophies around creativity, and there'll be journal prompts and different ways to make room in your life for your creativity.
Beautiful, beautiful. Elizabeth, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
And thank you for being with us. See you next time. Bye now.
Thank you for tuning into the Fiction Writers Podcast with Lana McAra, where we share tips, tricks, and ideas for fiction that is #unputdownable. Remember to visit our website at www.fictionwriterspodcast.com and enjoy even more great episodes like this one. Again, while you're here, subscribe to us via your favorite network. We look forward to seeing you next time on the Fiction Writers Podcast.